Today, we're going to be going over 8 wide receiver tips for beginners. Tip number 1, make sure off the line of scrimmage, your base, your stance is not too wide if you don't want this to happen to you, getting jammed all the way across the field. A lot of wide receivers will get in these different stances that they have, and their back leg will be completely extended. Their feet will be super wide outside their frame. That is not a position where you can move. The best case scenario on this is that this DB does not jam with his hands. We take an extra false step to bring this foot back under my frame, and then I get off the ball. And that extra false step right there is wasted time. So guys, in your stance off the ball, you want to be in something called 90-90, where your front leg is at a 90-degree angle, and then your back leg is also at a 90-degree angle. Don't extend the back leg because that's just going to create a false step, and that makes it more likely for this DB to get hands and jam us off the ball, okay? Now, tip number 2, fellas, is going to be taking what the DB gives you with your press release. So when you have a DB who's lined up in outside shade press, even if you have to run an outside breaking route, in a situation where it's not an MOR, I don't know if any of you know what an MOR is. An MOR means mandatory outside release. If it's not an MOR, not a mandatory outside release, do not force the outside release simply because you have an outside breaking route. Take what the DB gives you with an inside release. So we look at this example here from Garrett Wilson. He's trusting himself at the top of the break. He's trusting his route running even versus an outside shade press coverage guy. So guys, you got to understand that a DB in outside shade press, his goal is to stop the outside route. So if we just try to take off and run to the outside, maybe even give him a quick move to the inside, he's going to get hands. And when I run my out route and I'm right up on the sideline, that's not enough space for the quarterback. Let's attack him. Let's make him think we're going to the outside and move him off that platform and get him to jump to the outside. So now I can take a free inside release. I avoid that hand contact, and I'm giving the quarterback room to throw me open. It's no different, guys, than if you have inside shade press and you have to run an inside breaking route. Inside shade press goal is to take away the inside route, force us outside. So we attack him inside, get him to move, take the outside release, and let's work to either stack or at the top of the break like Garrett Wilson does, he slips under that DB because, again, quarterback would rather have a slightly slower break, but room to throw us open. Now, before we get into tip number 3, fellas, if you're a wide receiver and you guys would like an 8-week daily training schedule that you could follow, check out that very first link in the description below for our elite wide receiver training package. What you'll get access to is 8 weeks of daily gym exercises specifically for receivers and daily field exercises for receivers to improve their route running, their press releases, and their catching ability. Guys, we break it down like Monday you're doing this, Tuesday you're doing that, Wednesday you're doing that with the exact sets and reps to follow, and we also provide a video example of each drill and each exercise. So guys, if you want some more information on our elite wide receiver training package, check out that very first link in the description below. Let's get back to this video. So tip number 3, you guys, when you're facing a press coverage DB, make sure that you step outside of his frame if you want him to move and if you want to get separation. So what do I mean by stepping outside the frame? So see when Michael Gallup comes off the ball right here. He's trying to work this DB to the inside, trying to get this DB to jump to the inside so he gets a free outside release on this fade route. When I say step outside the DB's frame, you want to think of it like you got 3 driving lanes. DB's in the middle lane, you got the far left lane, and then you got the far right lane. If I'm trying to get that DB to move to the left lane, move off that platform, I need to step all the way to that left lane. So you see how Gallup steps outside of this DB's frame. His hips, his shoulders, everything about his body is outside the frame because that's what makes it believable that you're actually going in that direction. A DB is supposed to be watching your hips. He's not supposed to be watching our feet. But when you step that wide, you bring your hips, you bring your upper half with the foot, and that's what can sell it more. So guys, don't just do these quick little steps inside the DB's shoulder frame. Let's step outside of his frame. And when you do, guys, make sure that your hip, pretend your hip is attached to your foot. So when you step outside of his frame, it's not outside of your frame. And you could still sell the movement, but still have your cut inside of your shoulder frame so you could push and get up vertical into your route without losing any speed. So tip number 3, you guys, make sure that we step outside the DB's frame when he is in press man coverage. Now, tip number 4, you guys, is making sure that we have a violent hip drop at the top of breaks where I have to drop my hips like a curl, a comeback, a hitch route, or even a dig route. What are we trying to sell every single time that we run a route? We're trying to make this DB think that we are running a fade. We want to make him think that we are running a vertical route, trying to take the top off the defense and catch this thing over the shoulder. Our goal is to get him to open up his hips and turn towards the opposite end zone, aka opening the gate. So how I do that is I got to make sure that I run hard, I got to run with long strides, and I got to make sure I have a good body language position. Everything about this needs to look like a fade route until it's not, which is the break point. So when you have to drop your hips, you guys, don't just think I'm going to sink my hips. Don't just think I'm going to beat the drum with my hands and chop my feet. Think that you got a string attached to your chin and somebody is taking that string and pulling it straight down to your knee as quickly as they can. And you are sitting your butt down like you're playing musical chairs. The music stops, you drop that chin to into your knee as quickly as you can, because the quicker you lower that center of gravity, the quicker you will be able to stop and get out of a comeback, a curl, or a hitch break. So that's a textbook route there from Deontay Johnson. So tip number 4, you guys, have a violent hip drop at the top of the route. So now, tip number 5, you guys, is pair your routes together. So what do I mean by pairing your routes together? So this wide receiver is going to be running a post route at about 12 yards versus a DB who's sitting inside shade, off man coverage at about 10 to 11 yards away, I would say. So if we have inside shade coverage, remember, what's his goal being inside shade? We talked about this with press. His goal is to stop the inside route. So he doesn't want this receiver to run a post, a dig, a curl. He wants to force everything to the outside. So how you would run a route versus this, you would not stem this DB and try to attack his inside hip, is the second you start to stem him, what does he do? He starts to keep his leverage inside. So where you'd want to attack is you would want to attack his outside shoulder and his outside hip. We'd want to sell vertical, just like the last example. We want him to open up his hips so you could slip underneath him. Because if you stem to the inside and he keeps that leverage, your route's going to end up way on the other side of the field, and you're going to be running right into this DB. But watch how this receiver does it. He starts with an inside stem first. Because remember, what route do we want to sell? We want to sell like we're running a fade, but we also want to make it look like how I would run an actual fade based on the coverage. So if you're running a fade route versus inside shade off man, you would stem to the inside to try to get that DB to move, then work to the outside. A lot of times receivers will just do very basic things. They don't pair their moves together. So you see how this receiver gives this hard move to the inside. We call that a vertical set. It sets you back up vertical. So he gives that move inside. DB's thinking, okay, he's trying to work to the inside. He's breaking back out. Oh, I've seen this before. Maybe he's ran a fade like this. Maybe he's studied this on film. So that's what's more likely to get him to open up, think that it's a fade, and then we're able to get separation on the post. So it's almost a way of running a double move, I guess you could say, on a single move route. So make sure, guys, you are pairing your routes and even pairing your releases together off that line of scrimmage. Now, next tip, you guys, we have to know how to block as a wide receiver. If you don't know how to block as a receiver and you're not good at these 3 things, you will not see the field. So let's look at this Travis Hunter example, right? First things first, when you're blocking a DB, you want to be under control. Don't be over anxious to make a play. A lot of times what receivers will do is they'll come off the ball like a bat out of hell, trying to attack this guy, knock his head off, and they're very out of control with their base. So you see how Hunter approaches this DB? He's under control. Number 2, guys, you want to have a wide base. A lot of times guys have very narrow feet. Their feet are super close together. So when their feet are close together, all it takes is one good pull from this DB and it will knock us off balance. Pretend like you're standing on a surfboard or a skateboard and you have a low center of gravity, which will help you be more balanced. So be under control, have a wide base, and then when you get hands on the DB, keep those feet driving and keep those feet active. If you could focus on those 3 things, you'll become a much bigger asset in the run game as a wide receiver. So you got to make sure that you know how to block, okay? So now, next tip for wide receivers is understanding that not every single move is going to work based on where you are at on the field. So Hunter Renfrow is going to be running a 10-yard out route versus outside shade off man coverage, but he is in the red zone. This is the 20-yard line. This DB is sitting right here almost on the 5. His heels are on the 5. So let's talk about this, right? What do we want to do? This is just like that post example we were talking about versus inside shade off man. Now it's just the opposite. DB's lined up outside shade off man. So he's not going to try to just force it to the outside, because as soon as he runs to the outside, that DB will keep his leverage, and then that QB's got no space to throw the out route. So he's going to attack this inside shoulder and attack this inside hip. But because they're in the red zone, he can't just put his head down and sell vertical and expect that DB to open up his hips. That DB knows we're in the red zone. A deep fade is not a threat, but what is a threat is maybe an inside breaking route. So you could still attack the shoulder and attack the hip, but there's a different way that you can do it. So watch what Hunter Renfrow does. He uses this move called a rocker step to threaten that inside shoulder and hip to give him space to the outside. Let's talk about it. So a rocker step, you guys, is you step in the direction that you are going first. So he steps like he's running the out route first. He's trying to sell like he's running a post or an in route to get this DB to be over anxious. So he steps hard with the first move, pushes off of it, and hits that second move. Meanwhile, he's still accomplishing the things that we need to accomplish on this route versus this coverage look, attacking the inside shoulder and attacking the inside hip. So he uses that rocker step to do it rather than just running hard and putting his head down to get him to flip open his hips. If we're on the opposite 20, yeah, put your head down. A deep threat is still a fade, but if we're in the red zone, I got to make sure that I don't do that because that DB will stay patient. A lot of DBs are much smarter than they seem. Now, tip number 8, to be a successful wide receiver, you guys, especially for you beginners out there, understand that when you are facing a physical press coverage guy right up on the line, your releases have to be lateral. So look at this example here from a wide receiver from Arizona State. He does this quick jab move to the outside, but I want you to watch how flat he steps off the ball. If you have a DB who's maybe a yard back and you're doing like this move with your back foot where you're trying to throw a jab to the outside, if you step lateral like this, right, where you're stepping almost like, I guess you could say like your feet are parallel to the line of scrimmage. If you're stepping lateral like this and this DB's a yard away, he may jump, but he could still cut off your angle because you're not closing space. But when that DB's right up on the line of scrimmage closing space for us, I want to make him miss laterally because he already closed the distance for me. So I step lateral, I get him to jump, and then I could go. So guys, make sure when you're facing physical press coverage right in your face, don't attack vertical. Don't run into the hand contact if we don't have to. Make that DB miss laterally.